Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Quantum Spirituality on Dreamvisions7RadioNetwork.com, the show where past spiritual wisdom and present-day science merge to show us our future. Your host is Peter Canova, author of the 25-time award-winning book series, The First Souls Trilogy, available on Amazon, and Peter's website, petercanova.com. That's PeterCanova.com. This show is a live video, so if you're only listening and want to watch, go to Peter's website, petercanova.com. PeterCanova.com, where you can access his Facebook page to leave comments or questions, and click the D7RN link where you can receive a free gift video.
Hello, friends, followers, and listeners. I'm your host from Quantum Spirituality, Peter Canova. This is the show where the past and the present merge to unlock the mysteries of our future. I just want to remind our new listeners that you may want to go back and listen to the first 3 shows, because this show builds one episode on the other. It's kind of instructional in a way. And in the first 3 episodes in particular, we provide a framework to understand some of the issues that we speak of on quantum physics and on spirituality in the later episodes. So we have a great show lined up for you today. And without any further delay, please listen to it and enjoy. And join us every Tuesday, first Tuesday of every month, for Quantum Spirituality. The comment I alluded to in the last show apparently raised a lot of interest or questions that I've been getting in emails. And that had to do with the mention of there being human-like beings on the planet, but basically not conscious in the sense that we are conscious as Homo sapiens today. This is a real branch of study and theory that's dated back to ancient times. It goes under the heading of pre-Adamite theory, and that means before Adam. What kind of human life there was before Adam. And many traditions describe these human, or I don't know if you call them humanoid or human-like beings, that were roaming the planet many thousands of years ago, but they were different. They were different from what we would call a human being today in terms of consciousness. Now, the Muslims, for instance, said that there were beings called jinn and hin that predated humans, that looked like us, but did not possess consciousness or even soul, as they might describe it. There's also rabbinical midrash or commentary or interpretation on that same subject. But this whole idea goes back thousands of years, as I said, even being addressed by people such as Aristotle. We also know that from the previous show that we have to give a certain definition to consciousness here to carry on this discussion. And that is that everything is conscious. Everything is part of consciousness, I should say. So whether it be plant, animal, whatever, there's always a degree of consciousness present in that, because consciousness is the foundation of everything that really exists. But we're talking about a higher level or higher degree of consciousness that has self-consciousness, abstract thinking, the ability to self-reflect, the characteristics of consciousness that are evident in human beings today, which would involve intention and volition, the ability to want something, picture something, have an intention to do something, and then the volition or the movement towards achieving those ends. These are all characteristics of what I'll call higher consciousness. And this is what really defines us as a species, a human species on the planet today. So even though consciousness permeates everything, we're talking about a particular degree of conscious intelligence that is able to direct, formulate, and even create in and of itself under its own volition, under its own desires. So that being in mind, keeping that in mind, let's look at a couple of different views on this subject. And incidentally, this is a really interesting topic because it gets into the origin of life, the origin of consciousness, and the origin of humanity. It also covers things such as evolution, has to address questions such as evolution. So let's look at a couple of different views on how all this higher consciousness came about. And I think you'll find it to be kind of an interesting discussion. So this gentleman with the luxury beard growth in back of me is Charles Darwin. And Darwin, probably unintentionally, gave birth to the whole materialist interpretation of life and consciousness. I don't think it was so much anything that he proposed as a theory as much as Darwinists and neo-Darwinists just kind of appropriated the data that he developed and interpreted in a certain way. But be that as it may, the two main flaws of Darwinism are, number one, that we descended from a common ancestor. And this has never been proved. And in fact, the fossil record really indicates exactly the opposite. The fossil record seems to indicate that all life on Earth developed around 530 million years ago during the Cambrian period. And all the body types or phyla that are the major ones that are in existence today all appeared simultaneously at the same time. The second major chink in Darwinism is that we descended as human beings from other similar species. But again, this has never been shown in the fossil record. The fossil record just seems to indicate the opposite. And the strange thing about it is that human beings, as we know it today, appeared very suddenly on the scene, according to the fossil record, not developed over a long, or evolved over a long period of time. But be that as it may, Darwinism was very useful as far as indicating evolution within species, but not having one species evolving from another. So the whole premise of modern day materialist scientists on this subject is really kind of built on very shaky ground. Now, there's another body of theory on how life and consciousness originated on Earth, and it would fall under the general heading of extraterrestrial. Now, I think many of you have probably watched the show on TV called Ancient Aliens, and pretty much the theme of that whole series is visitations by beings from outer space and how they left their marks or influenced life on Earth. Probably one of the most well-known of the scholars or authors in this theory or genre of thinking is J.R.R Sitchin, who is an Israeli scholar. And Sitchin apparently made a thorough study of Sumerian cuneiforms, which were carvings in stone. And this is probably the oldest documented writing we have in human history. And he wove a very fascinating story that he gleaned from those cuneiform tablets. And Sitchin said that there is a 12th planet out there, which has a very infrequent orbit, bringing it close to Earth every several 100,000 years. And the beings of this planet were called the Anunnaki. And the Anunnaki came to Earth, and they were conducting different activities here, mining for elements that they needed in their own home planet. And as the story goes, they needed more labor. And so they took a species which was one of these human-like creatures, or humanoid creatures, primitive creature. And basically they combined their DNA with its DNA. And in a series of experiments, and there were a number of failures, and until they finally seemed to perfect a human that could be a thinking creature, take orders, and so forth. And incidentally, pay close attention to this story, because there's going to be echoes of this in other places, which makes it kind of interesting. But they finally perfected this creature, and they used these human creatures as servants and as labor, in effect, in the mines and for other activities that they were conducting on Earth. And there was a faction of these Anunnaki, these godlike Anunnaki beings, that were favorably disposed and sympathetic to the humans. And there was another faction that were not, in fact, wanted to get rid of them. And they caused a flood to happen across the earth. But the Anunnaki, who were friendly to the humans, tipped them off, and some of the humans survived. And this was a very kind of like Noah and the Ark type of situation. And in fact, Sumerian and Babylonian myths have very close parallels to the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, particularly when it comes to the flood story. Their flood story is very, very similar to the flood story that was depicted in the Bible. But in any case, the Anunnaki finally left, and humans were sort of then left to fend for themselves, and ended up basically developing the civilizations with the help of the Anunnaki, and some of their knowledge and their DNA ended up forming the civilizations, the early civilizations that we know about historically. So this whole genre of theory of how human consciousness started is also a little bit related to another theory called panspermia. Now, panspermia is a little bit different in the sense that it didn't picture aliens coming down in spaceships and seeding life on Earth, but rather that different spores or different organic seeds would collide with the ancient Earth. And that's how essentially organic life, the beginnings of organic life, got started, and then eventually evolved according to more traditional evolution theory. So that's just another variant of how life may have come from outer space. So it's kind of interesting reading. Sitchin wrote over a dozen books on this subject. There's been a number of people who have criticized his scholarship in this and so forth, but I've read the books, and I found them extremely interesting. I don't necessarily agree with everything in Sitchin's work, but it was interesting reading. And as I said, there are very kind of eerie echoes of this in other sources that we're going to talk about in a minute. Let's deal next with the ancient spiritual sources on the topic of consciousness and the origin of human life. And as usual, we're going to go to the Gnostics on this, because the Gnostics, at least in my opinion, were the most encompassing, far-reaching, and comprehensive seers of their age. They incorporated a number of different traditions. But just to remind everybody who the Gnostics were, the Gnostics predated Christianity, and their wisdom was a mixture of Hindu, Persian, and different other spiritual traditions around the Mediterranean, like the Greeks and the Jews. And they actually became the very first Christians, because when Jesus was preaching his message in Judea, they recognized him for the high spiritual figure that he was, and his message that he was teaching was a very Gnostic message. So they became the first Christians. Now, we wouldn't really know much about the Gnostics, because the Orthodox Church literally drove them out of the Christian circles. The Orthodox were those that took a more literal view of Jesus' teaching. They didn't really understand the inner hidden teaching, the esoteric message that Jesus was teaching, which the Gnostics fully grasped. And the Orthodox Church viewed the Gnostics as a threat, and essentially they banished them, actually killed them in many cases, and had their writings burnt. But a few of their writings survived in the form of scrolls, like you see in the background. And these were discovered in caves in Egypt back in the 1940s. And this and a few other texts that had been recovered before is really what has helped us shed light on the Gnostic wisdom. Now, I'm going to kind of give you the Writer's Digest version of this because it gets pretty involved. But the Gnostic vision of consciousness and the origin of humanity is that the Supreme Being basically projected out portions of its own consciousness to reflect back on itself like mirrors. And these points of consciousness were independent spiritual beings, and they were given free will because if not, they could not essentially contemplate the source itself, because they would just be of the same vibration as the source. So they, in order to be individual beings, they had to be of a little different vibration or level of consciousness than the source itself. But most of these spiritual beings used their intelligence, used their consciousness, used their free will to stay in alignment with the one, with the supreme source of God. And because they had free will, though, at some point, some of these spirits decided to pursue their own destinies, to pursue their own individual desires, rather than stay in alignment with the source. And they proceeded to fall away from the high spiritual vibration into lower states of being. So they went from spirit to the soul vibration, and then from soul into bodily form. And the reason why we have the imperfection in this world, according to the Gnostics, is that these spirits who had fallen into lower consciousness no longer could contemplate perfection. And perfection was really pursuing the plan or the the vibration of the one source. Instead, because they were all pursuing their own independent paths, we ended up with a kind of a mishmash of a world of beauty and a world of imperfection, a world of good and a world of evil. And evil, in essence, was the further that you moved away from an understanding and from an alignment with the source. And there was a whole spectrum of evil. I mean, it could range from just selfishness into very other unwholesome forms of existence. So, this whole idea of these spirits who actually interfered with the plan of the source and started to shape the formation of our world, started interfering and warping and shaping the formation of our world, is not just a Gnostic belief. It's a theme that we're going to see manifested in other traditions of how consciousness originated. You've already heard about the Anunnaki, and the Anunnaki would be very analogous to these spirits that fell away from their source and ended up creating the human being, which is an animal form embodied with consciousness. And we're going to be discussing other psychic visions of the origin of humanity and consciousness, and you're going to see some amazing overlaps here between the Gnostic vision and these other traditions. So, really the thing is that we have echoes of all these different beliefs, and they take different forms. They're somewhat different in their orientations, but if you look at their core, they all seem to be telling us a very similar message, which is that consciousness first came from another dimension, another vibration of existence, and embodied itself in the physical world. So let's go on and look at some other belief systems of how this all came about. This is Dreamvision 7 Radio and TV Network and Quantum Spirituality with Peter Canova. I am your host, author of the 25-time award-winning First Souls Trilogy, which is available on my website, petercanova.com. That's petercanova.com. Please visit when you have a chance, and we'll be back shortly.
The First Souls Trilogy, one of the most highly awarded fictional independent book series on the market, is a grand vision of human evolution. It chronicles the first spirit consciousness to enter the material world in 3 page-turning novels that introduce a new paradigm of reality based on genuine ancient wisdom and quantum science. These inspirational thrillers will force you to rethink the nature of the world in which we live. Visit the petercanova.com website for information and ordering. In a world facing annihilation, a miraculous African nun rises to become the first female pope through a web of war, murder, and betrayal. Loved by some, hated by many, she becomes the deadly target of Islamic terrorists and her own cardinals as she introduces a new vision that will either save humanity or accelerate its destruction. 4 people must race against a nuclear holocaust to learn her astonishing secret. Pope Annalisa is available at petercanova.com, Amazon, and other online booksellers and bookstores worldwide.
Why are we here? How can we be happy? Questions asked from millennials to boomers. Crappy to Happy, Sacred Stories of Transformational Joy answers them using true stories of grit, grace, and love. James Redfield, author of The Celestine Prophecy, wrote in the foreword, "This book is a seminar about emerging truths and offers grounded solutions through the art of the comeback." Dr. Bernie Siegel, a contributing author, wrote, "Bodies die, but spirits and consciousness survive and recycle." So, grab some tissues, open your book, and prepare to cry and laugh till it heals. Crappy to Happy by Reverend Ariel Patricia and Kathleen O'Keefe Canavas. Available from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and booksellers worldwide.
How did life start on Earth, and why is there so much suffering? Are we living in a simulated reality like the characters in the Matrix movie? Do parallel dimensions exist alongside ours, influencing our experience? What are the mysterious dark energies that penetrate our universe? Peter Canova folds space and time to bring the twin bookends of ancient wisdom and quantum science into a single focal point, answering these and many other deep mysteries of the creation. Quantum Spirituality can be heard every Tuesday at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. Eastern and 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Pacific on syndicated Dreamvision 7 Radio Network. See the show where past and present merge to show us our future.
This is Dreamvision 7 Radio Network, uniting mankind with universal love. Our shows are created from the heart, bringing each listener to a place of divine enlightenment. Breathe, relax, and enjoy. Let life flow.
Welcome back to Quantum Spirituality on Dreamvision 7 Radio and TV Network. I'm your host, Peter Canova, and you can find out more about me on my website, petercanova.com. That's petercanova.com, where you can learn more about some of the works that I've done. And one of my most popular books, Pope Annalisa, I'm happy to say, is now out on audio format. It's available on audio, or Audible, I should say, put out by ACX. which I believe is affiliated with Amazon. So please check that out when you have a chance. Also, if you have any questions or comments for me, you can leave them on my Facebook page, which is Peter Canova Author, or you can access that same page through my website. Another picture of the origin of humanity and the birth of consciousness comes from the psychic field. And the man pictured to my right is the most famous American psychic, Edgar Cayce, who died mid-century. And Cayce was famous for giving thousands of readings, medical readings and other readings that helped many, many people heal. And the most fascinating, at least to my way of thinking, body of Cayce's readings had to do with his visions of ancient humanity. Cayce described Atlantis in detail and the coming of spirit into the material world in early civilizations such as Lemuria and Atlantis. And now, before you start to dismiss this as being a little too out there, and just remember this, we're talking about consciousness, and consciousness manifests itself through all of us, through our unconscious minds. And what psychics do is tap in with a more clear channel to those sources of the personal and collective unconscious, the racial memory. So don't be too quick to dismiss Edgar Cayce's readings. And in many instances, they overlap with certain things that Sitchin has said and the certain other aspects that scholars over the years have said about early humanity. But Cayce's picture of the birth of consciousness within human form went something like this. Certain spirits decided to exercise their free will. And instead of aligning themselves with God's purpose, they decided to use their spiritual power to explore on their own, to have personal experience, as opposed to the collective experience that happens in the higher consciousness or spirit realms. And as soon as they made that decision to exercise their free will and pursue their own individual desire, in that moment they became souls, because there's a difference between soul and spirit. Spirit aligns itself with the will of the Supreme Being. Soul is the record of the experience of a spirit having its own path and having its own free will. And as the story goes, and incidentally, this very closely comes into play with the Gnostics. But Cayce essentially said that there was a first fall of spirit into what we'll call the soul realm or soul mind. And it was here that they played out different scenarios of existence, which would not be material as we understand it. But there was a psychic earth. In fact, one of the reasons that we see a difference between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 in the Bible is, as Cayce was describing, is one of them was describing the world in a psychic or non-material condition prior to it becoming material. And these spirits, or these souls at this point, were basically kind of manipulating the plan that the Supreme Being had already laid out. So there already was, in effect, a let's say a spiritual or psychic earth in existence, and it came from the mind of the Supreme Being. It was part of the Supreme Being's plan. The souls started interfering with this, and they started introducing their own creations into this. And eventually, this led to the formation of, or slowing of a vibration of this psychic universe, of this spiritual universe. And it slowed down to basically become the physical reality that we know today. And then there was a second fall of these souls as they saw the developing earth and the animal life in the earth and so forth. They wanted to experience what it would be like to have material forms, what it would be like to feel, smell, touch, taste things. And they began to project themselves in and out of physical forms. Now, at first, because there was no template for a human body, and these were disembodied souls or spirits, they began projecting themselves into the minds of animals to experience materiality through the standpoint of being animals. From this experience, they started to evolve their own primitive bodies. In fact, Cayce says that these universal legends that we see of these half men, half beast people that are present in all cultures, like the Sumerians or the Egyptians and so forth, were actual representations of these developing hybrid experiments that the souls were conducting on Earth to assume a material form. And this is where it somewhat overlaps with Sitchin's story and other stories here, in the sense that there were waves of these spirits that came in. And the first wave became trapped in these animal forms. It became bestial. They forgot their spiritual origin entirely. Other waves came in to rescue them, essentially to try and wake them up, but they knew they couldn't do it in these primitive forms that these souls had created or projected themselves in. So they basically took the highest form that they could find on the planet at that time, which was a humanoid creature. And from the spirit realm, essentially, they hovered around it and used their power to evolve it, to develop a glandular system. It came down from the trees, shed hair, and started to assume a more human form. And it was a work in progress. It wasn't fully made, but there were different iterations of these forms over time. So that Cayce says, for instance, the earliest Atlanteans actually had a third eye, and they had powers that were incredible because they had just come from the spirit realm. And so these other beings that had come before them, the first wave of souls who had been lost in more primitive forms, looked upon them as gods, and essentially started to worship them, when all they were their own fellow souls who had assumed forms that could express a higher consciousness. So you had different levels of consciousness and different levels of being that were on the planet at that time. But the way that the present human form was developed, according to the Cayce readings, is that they did take, just as Sitchin had said that the Anunnaki had done, they did experiment with this humanoid form and work to evolve it. And this evolution was, you wouldn't call it natural evolution or natural selection in the Darwinian sense, because it essentially involved spiritual energies evolving these bodies to the point where they were able to contain a higher consciousness. And once this was done, they projected themselves into these bodies, and they basically tried to rescue the previous souls who had come there, to bring them back to their original state. So the higher souls who had embodied in physical form developed a very high civilization that Cayce called Atlantis. And it was actually a highly technological civilization hundreds of thousands of years ago. And it's a very fascinating story. And much of my third book, The Light of Distant Suns, draws from the Cayce material, describing the origin of souls on Earth, and the civilization they built. But as it went in my book, and as the Cayce reading said, the pull of the material world was very great. The illusion of materiality was so great that over time, over thousands of years, even these higher souls started to forget their origins and define reality as being the boundaries of their skin, rather than understanding their spiritual origins. And there was a division amongst them. And there were the the sons of Belial, who were those souls who had really forgotten who they were and had descended into various forms of evil and self-gratification, because essentially that is the outcome of free will. The final outcome of free will misused is extreme individualism, where you're only looking out for yourself and have disregard for others. Essentially, it's sociopathic. And so the sons of Belial were kind of the villains in this story. And the children of the Law of One were those who retained some contact with their spiritual source. But essentially, in this high civilization they built, there was a civil war between these forces, which ended up unleashing energies that moved the tectonic plates of the earth and consumed this island continent that was Atlantis, or at least something that we call Atlantis today. And so it was a very fascinating story. But, you know, whether you take this literally or whether you take it symbolically or allegorically, I think the message here is that there were these humanoid forms that were on the planet prior to the descent of higher consciousness in physical bodies. So you could almost say that Cayce's view of the world was Darwinian in a spiritual sense, not so much in the material sense, which really means that in this view you could say that rather than, as opposed to Sitchin, where he felt life originated extraterrestrially, Cayce would have said that life and consciousness originated interdimensionally. Now, that happens to be the view that I subscribe to, because I do believe that consciousness being universal is everything. And so it makes perfect sense to me that the evolutionary path that we would have taken would have been spiritually dominated as opposed to just purely physically dominated. I think it was both. But I think in terms of the higher consciousness we're talking about, it was a spiritually driven evolution. So, this is a really interesting point of view. You can still read books on Edgar Cayce. In fact, there's an institute up in Virginia Beach, the Cayce Institute, which has survived from, I think, the 1940s up until today. And if you go to your regular bookstores, or certainly your spiritual or mystical bookstores, you can usually find a pretty good selection of Cayce readings, and particularly the ones on Atlantis. I think that, if you're interested in this subject, you find them completely fascinating. Now, Cayce, as you know in this show, we discuss a lot about Gnosticism in this show. And the Gnostics were the mystic seers who existed all around the Mediterranean basin several thousand years ago. The Gnostics were very interesting because their whole approach was not really a religious one, it was a spiritual one. And it derived from India, from Persia, from Judaism, from Greece, and Egypt, and they centered probably around Alexandria, Egypt, but they were all throughout the Mediterranean basin. And the Gnostic view of how the world was created is very, very similar to what Cayce said, which is essentially there was a falling away of spirit, or the one supreme being had projected out parts of itself, and these parts of itself, like the example we've given here before about water descending from a high mountain, pure mountain lake, down to the bottom of the mountain, and it's the same water, but it picks up pollutions or limitations along the way, so that the water at the bottom has a different perspective than the pure source at the top. And essentially the Gnostics said the same thing, that these souls fell away, and they were powerful. You could consider them gods in their own right, but their vision was limited, and their perspective was limited. And so they essentially created a lot of imperfection, of which the material universe was part of that imperfection. And that Gnostic view was very similar to the views that Edgar Cayce held. So this psychic perspective is another avenue to understand the presence of humanoids that were not conscious or have souls exactly in the sense that we think about it today. Here's another fascinating aspect of the creation story, and it hits a little bit closer to home for most people today to show just how closely related these echoes of the creation really are. Now, almost everybody today is familiar with the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings. A little bit lesser known to a lot of people is that he compiled a whole myth, in effect, that underpinned his world of Middle-earth. And it was in a book called The Silmarillion, which is my personal favorite of all the Tolkien works. But in the Silmarillion, Tolkien describes a being called the One, Eru, the One. And the One projected out or created other spiritual beings that you could call angels, in effect. And together they conducted a symphony according to the will of the One to spin the creation of the universe. Think of it as a musical creation, or a symphony as an analogy. And in this symphony, one of the greatest of the angels kept playing a music of his own, which created a discord in the entire symphony. He was no longer playing in unison or in harmony with the will of the One, but was using his own will to spin his own music. And it created a tremendous discord. And in effect, it warped the creation of the universe. And the story went on, and we picked up in Middle-earth, where these counter spiritual forces, these evil spiritual forces, were greatly oppressing the souls of Middle-earth. And there was a huge battle, or series of huge battles, and the essentially destroyed large parts of Middle-earth as these beings went to war with one another. And I'm giving you the short version here, but I'm hoping you can already see the tremendously close parallels to the Gnostic and the Cayce stories. And, you know, what's really fascinating is how that neither Tolkien nor Cayce, to my knowledge, had any awareness, any formal awareness of the Gnostics. Now, in the Cayce readings, he even mentioned the Gnostics, saying that the truth of existence was closest to the Gnostic version. And remember, Cayce had never read the Gnostic text. To my knowledge, neither had Tolkien, and yet both of these people are talking about Gnostic symbology stories that deal with the creation. So, you know, again, this is an interesting little sidebar into the fact that the echoes of the creation permeate inside of our unconscious, inside of our racial unconscious, and they'll manifest over time in different ways, in different stories, in different forms of art. And J.R.R. Tolkien's book was one great modern example that most people can relate to. It's time for a break. I'm your host, Peter Canova, and this is Quantum Spirituality, the show where the past and the present merge to tell us about our future. Don't go away. I'll be right back.
The First Souls trilogy, one of the most highly awarded fictional independent book series on the market, is a grand vision of human evolution. It chronicles the first spirit consciousness to enter the material world in 3 page-turning novels that introduce a new paradigm of reality based on genuine ancient wisdom and quantum science. These inspirational thrillers will force you to rethink the nature of the world in which we live. Visit the petercanova.com website for information and ordering. In a world facing annihilation, a miraculous African nun rises to become the first female pope through a web of war, murder, and betrayal. Loved by some, hated by many, she becomes the deadly target of Islamic terrorists and her own cardinals as she introduces a new vision that will either save humanity or accelerate its destruction. 4 people must race against a nuclear holocaust to learn her astonishing secret. Pope Annalisa is available at petercanova.com, Amazon, and other online booksellers and bookstores worldwide.
What if dreams can diagnose your life? What if we can meet the love of our life in dreams? Join host Kat O'Keefe Canovis, the #1 internationally best-selling author of Dreams That Can Save Your Life, written with Duke University medical doctor Larry Burke. Dreaming Healing is where we'll explore dreams, research, and interpret dreams from you, the caller. Dreaming Healing shows can be heard every Tuesday at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern, with live shows on the first and third evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific Time on syndicated Dreamvisions 7 radio network. Come live your dreams out loud with Kat.
How did life start on Earth, and why is there so much suffering? Are we living in a simulated reality like the characters in the Matrix movie? Do parallel dimensions exist alongside ours, influencing our experience? What are the mysterious dark energies that penetrate our universe? Peter Canova folds space and time to bring the twin bookends of ancient wisdom and quantum science into a single focal point, answering these and many other deep mysteries of the creation. Quantum Spirituality can be heard every Tuesday at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. Eastern and 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Pacific on syndicated Dreamvisions 7 radio network. See the show where past and present merge to show us our future.
This is Dreamvision 7 Radio Network, uniting mankind with universal love. Our shows are created from the heart, bringing each listener to a place of divine enlightenment. Breathe, relax, and enjoy. Let life flow.
We're back, and I'm your host, Peter Canova. Incidentally, you can listen to the show online in your car with Bluetooth or on Amazon Echo simply by saying, Alexa, play Dreamvisions 7. You can also go to my website, petercanova.com, that's petercanova.com, where you can access the show and the archives. Or you can leave comments through the portal accessing to my Facebook page, Peter Canova Author, and leave any comments, questions that you may have there. In this final segment of today's show, I'm going to do something special because I have gotten some requests in asking me about the writing process and how I go about translating these things that I speak of on the show into fictional works. And one of the ways I do this is I create storyboards. Now, sometimes they're just static pictures that go along and outline the narrative, and other times I put them onto video. So what I'm going to show you next is the storyboard that I used to develop one of the final scenes in The Light of Distant Suns. It's a scene where the Civil War in this Atlantis our civilization called Atlanta, where these forces essentially end up destroying themselves and their island continent. So for those of you who don't have an interest in literature, you might want to tune out at this point. But for those of you that do and want to understand a little bit deeper in how we translate some of these thoughts and knowledge into fictional writing, you might be interested in this. So let's take a look. First the flames ignited, then came the roaring of men's voices in the distance, followed by compression gunfire.
Next, the clanging of swords sounded as the battle drew nearer the citadel. The enemy was beginning to cross from the mainland to the first of Posadia's concentric island rings. The two sisters, Amlia and Tercelia, the last empress and princess of Great Atalanta, stood on the terrace of the imperial palace atop the citadel mount in the center of the three-ringed harbor. The wind was hot with smoke and cinders bearing their country's doom to their nostrils. They looked at one another and nodded, their figures framed against the blur of a haze-choked sky. They would not await a passive fate in the citadel. Each of them bore a separate burden, a separate task that would affect the future of life on Earth. With 100 Blackmane Imperial Guards, they began the trek down to the lower city where the fighting would become heavy. Amlia positioned herself in the center of the street. Like an island, the current of humanity flowed around her until she removed her headpiece, her golden hair spilling across her shoulders. People froze seeing the rare yellow locks for which she was famous. "The Empress," they shouted. "The Empress, Amlia Carason herself, is here." The crush slowed and halted as the people gathered around her, many going to their knees. Amlia said to Tercelia in a low voice, "Make haste now to the appointed place. The Elder Farah have transferred the sacred manuscripts from Pelion, but you hold the most precious text of all. The Book of Remembrance must survive at all costs. Humanity must know what we did and why we fell, or forever be slaves to the world of illusion that ensnared us." Tercelia refused to leave. She told Amlia the danger of dying or falling into the hands of the Belials was too great. She was too easy to identify with her golden hair, and the Belials would love to capture her. "Obey me in this," Amlia said. "Menariel and his ilk shall never touch me again. What you carry is too important for the world to come. I command you to leave, and I will meet you at our appointed destination. My fate is to save my people, and that destiny awaits me elsewhere, not in this doomed land." After Tercelia left, Amlia considered her words for the assembled crowd. How could she tell them? Great Atalanta, Lord of the world, home of the descended gods, had fallen by its own hand, fated to extinction, never to rise again on this earth. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she saw her adoring people. Her soul was heavy with the knowledge that she had been instrumental in their destruction. "People of Poseidon, I do not ask you to stay and fight, but take to the seas and live. Soon our land will be destroyed. No sorting shall be made. Friend and foe alike shall perish. Find what boats you can and flee while General Petronian still holds the harbor open. Able-bodied men, stay with me and my guard to protect the passage of the women and children." The enemy soon reached them. Swords sounded on shields, compression guns echoed in the air, and growls of pain and desperation permeated the final stand of the imperial household. Then a great deafening sound caused the fighting to stop. Loyal and enemy warriors all went to their knees. Far off, clouds of debris rose over Mount Palacindra, and when it cleared, the top of the mountain was gone. Moments later, the land shook in violent spasms, and structures began to fall like stacked tiles. As Amlia saw a building coming down on top of her, she instinctively raised her hand, clenched her teeth, and resolved not to die before she atoned for the destruction she helped create. Dying now would be the easy way out, and surely God would not let her, of all people, go that easily.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. And that's how I work to translate the ideas and images in my mind onto paper. It just helps to create these visual storyboards. And of course, I don't do that for the whole book, but just for key segments of the book. And some of you, I guess, have expressed interest in it. So I hope you found that a little bit enlightening. But whether you take all of the things that we talked about today literally or allegorically, symbolism always has truth at its core. And somewhere in our remote past, there's a story of the human soul and of consciousness entering into this plane of existence. Certainly the story about Atlantis, the way that Cayce has told it, and others have envisioned it, like Tolkien, who have a very similar Atlantis-like story. In fact, in Tolkien's book, The Silmarillion, there's the sinking of a continent of a superior race of humans. There's something really to think about there. And anyway, I hope you enjoyed all this. I tried to put it all together to make it as coherent as possible and show you how all these various traditions, whether it be in the form of spirituality, folklore, mystical wisdom, or art and entertainment, are all woven together. And they kind of point in a very interesting direction as far as who we are, what we are, and how we became conscious. So, signing off for today, and we'll see you on the next show. And we have come to the end of our show today. Please remember to watch us the first Tuesday of every month, and you can access the show archives through my page on Dreamvisions 7 Network, which is accessible through my website, petercanova.com. So please keep on joining us. This is Quantum Spirituality, the show where the past and the present, where science and mysticism merge to tell us about our future. Join us again next time. The First Souls Trilogy is a fictionalized series of thrillers embodying the topics described in the Quantum Spirituality podcast. The epic saga of the first souls to consciously embody in the material world is the story of humanity's fall and resurrection, of its journey and evolution back to higher consciousness. If you have further interest in the First Souls Trilogy, please visit petercanova.com. That's petercanova.com, where you can find descriptions of the books and other valuable information, or you can see the reviews of the books on Amazon. The trilogy books are available directly for sale as paperbacks or ebooks through all online booksellers, or you can link through to these sites through the Peter Canova website. The first book, Pope Annalisa, is also available as an audiobook through Audible.
This ends today's segment of Quantum Spirituality, the show where the past and present merge to show us our future. Join us the first Tuesday of each month for cutting-edge information and informative new episodes. This show will be archived on the Quantum Spirituality Dreamvisions 7 Radio Network website page, also accessible at petercanova.com. That's petercanova.com.
This is Dreamvision 7 Radio Network, uniting mankind with universal love. Our shows are created from the heart, bringing each listener to a place of divine enlightenment. Breathe, relax, and enjoy. Let life flow.